Harlan West disguised himself as an ordinary worker inside his own company. No boardroom, no title, no protection of wealth. Just a man hidden in plain sight. Without warning, he announced a test. 4 women from the company. 4 envelopes. Inside each a black card with no spending limit. No rules, no restrictions. Only 3 days to show who they really were. Would they burn it on vanity? Would they chase power? Or would one of them prove that integrity still existed in a place ruled by ambition? The clock started ticking the moment those cards touched their hands. Harlan West was a man whose name alone could shift markets. In his world, titles bent and silence followed when he entered a room. Yet behind the power was a hollowness he could never fill. He had learned to wear control like armor, but armor rusts when no one ever reaches beyond it. For years, he sat at tables where laughter was timed to please him. Compliments flowed too easily, loyalty measured in bonuses, not in trust. He could predict every smile, every nod, every scripted word. It was exhausting to command respect but never receive honesty. He had given promotions and lost friends. He had signed contracts worth billions and left dinners alone. The higher he climbed, the more suffocating the air became. To others he was untouchable. To himself, he was trapped. This experiment was not a whim. It was a desperate cut into the facade he hated. If money was the mask everyone wore, he would remove the limits. Unlimited power, unlimited temptation, would anyone still choose differently? He wanted one glimpse, one proof, that sincerity could survive in a world poisoned by ambition. His disguise gave him anonymity, but it also gave him a chance. For the first time, Harlan West did not want control. He wanted truth. Carter had served at Harlan's side for 8 years, a shadow in boardrooms, a quiet witness in corridors where decisions worth billions were made. He knew the cadence of Harlan's temper, the subtle tremor in his voice before a storm, the stillness before he announced a move that left competitors broken. Carter respected him, admired his brilliance, yet feared the man's appetite for control, disguised as curiosity. So, when Harlan revealed this new experiment, Carter's heart sank. He had seen this look before, the restless gleam that meant someone somewhere would get hurt. He leaned against the edge of the desk arms, folded, trying to reason. Every time you call something an experiment, markets bleed or people cry. But words bounced off Harlan's resolve. Carter was loyal, but not blind. He understood that human nature was volatile, and giving someone limitless power was like lighting a match in a dry forest. Still, he could not walk away. If Harlan insisted on pushing this forward, someone had to watch the fallout. That someone inevitably was him. His role was never to stop the storm, only to stand beside the eye of it. As he left the room, his unease clung to him. He knew this experiment would not end neatly, and yet part of him wanted to see whether Harlan was right, or if the truth would be far uglier than either of them imagined. Nora Bennett was almost invisible in the grand machinery of the company. She wore the same faded uniform day after day, her shoes scuffed, her hair tied in a loose knot that always seemed a little undone. She hummed when she cleaned off key and carefree, filling empty corridors with a kind of unpolished life. Unlike the others, she never sought attention. She never asked for extra hours, never hinted for favors. In a place where every gesture carried calculation, Nora was startlingly simple. Once, when Harlan had wandered into the staff kitchen and stirred a pot of soup the wrong way, she had smacked his hand with a wooden spoon and scolded him as if he were a careless child. She didn't know who he really was then, or maybe she did, and simply didn't care. There was no ambition in her eyes, no hunger for advancement. Instead, there was steadiness, a rhythm that belonged to someone who had accepted life as it came. To executives, she was forgettable. To Harlan, she was a puzzle. She had never asked for anything, and that absence of want made her more unreadable than all the polished smiles around him. In a company suffocating with ambition, Nora was a breath of air untouched by greed. And that made her dangerous to Harlan's cynicism. If anyone could break his theory that money ruled all hearts, it would be the woman who seemed to live without it. Belle Summers walked through the company halls as if they were her personal runway. Every morning she arrived in a new designer dress perfume, trailing like a signature, her heels clicking a rhythm that demanded attention. She believed the office was not a workplace but a stage, and she was always the star. Colleagues whispered about her expenses, her obsession with image, but Belle thrived on it. To her, admiration was currency and envy was proof of her worth. She had tried countless times to impress Harlan West before his disguise, lavish gifts, Suggestive smiles at parties, loud declarations about her loyalty. Each attempt had slipped past him unnoticed, but Belle never quit. When the black card landed in her manicured hand, she did not hesitate. She smirked as if the universe had finally validated her belief she deserved more, and now she had the means to prove it. The others might see the card as a challenge. For Belle, it was a crown. She already pictured the gowns, the champagne, the flashing lights of a life that confirmed she was priceless. Her excitement was not quiet. She flaunted the envelope, openly announcing her victory before the test had even begun. For Belle, the card was not temptation. It was affirmation. If Belle lived in the spotlight, Tessa Monroe preferred the quiet authority of numbers and plans. She carried her tablet like a weapon, fingers always moving charts and schedules stacked with precision. To the casual eye, she looked disciplined, professional, perhaps even admirable. But beneath the polished exterior, ambition sharpened her every move. Tessa knew how to package her desires. She spoke of growth and self-investment, weaving ambition into language that sounded noble. Colleagues often admired her foresight, her way of framing personal gain as corporate progress. Yet the flash in her eyes betrayed her every calculation ultimately circled back to herself. When Harlan's black card slid across the desk, Tessa did not gasp or gush. She simply raised one brow, cool and contained as though she had been expecting this. Her lips curved into a smile too thin to reach her eyes. With clinical efficiency, she tucked the envelope beneath her arm, already drafting in her mind how to convert credit into influence. Unlike Belle, she would not waste this chance on glittering dresses. No, her purchases would be dressed as investments, conferences, retreats, courses with impressive names. She would parade receipts like trophies, making excess look like responsibility. Tessa's genius was not in how she spent, but in how she disguised spending as wisdom. And that deception made her dangerous in ways Belle could never match. Sloane Vesper never needed to shout for attention. She absorbed it simply by entering a room. She wore sunglasses indoors, a shield, and a statement daring others to question her. Her words dripped with sweetness, yet behind them coiled a control that left people nodding before they understood why. Sloane thrived on power games, and her elegance was her most effective weapon. Colleagues both admired and feared her. She knew every rumor before it spread, every weakness before it was confessed. She wrapped herself in couture and mystery, turning even silence into dominance. With Sloane, nothing ever seemed accidental. Every move was a performance of superiority. When the black card reached her, she paused longer than Belle or Tessa. She tilted her head, suspicion flickering beneath her mask. Some kind of trick, she asked softly, as though coaxing the answer she already knew. Harlan's disguised assurance seemed to satisfy her, but her smirk revealed something else. She had a plan before the card even touched her palm. For Sloane, 3 days of unlimited power was not freedom, it was a battlefield. She would orchestrate something larger than life, not to spend, but to dominate, to prove that even without limits she remained the one in control. The others would flaunt and pretend. Sloane would manipulate, and in her eyes the game had already begun. On the polished surface of the table, 4 envelopes waited, each identical but marked with a name written in silver ink. They looked harmless, almost elegant, but to Harlan they were traps, carefully baited snares designed to strip away the polished masks of those who held them. Belle's eyes glittered when she saw her name, her fingers grazing the foil letters as though they crowned her royalty. Tessa examined hers like a contract, her mind already calculating outcomes. Sloane touched the envelope lightly, suspicion flickering as though she sensed poison behind the invitation. Carter stood off to the side, arms folded, his silence heavy. He had watched Harlan orchestrate battles in boardrooms, but this felt different. Reckless, dangerous. None of them asked what lay inside. They didn't need to. The weight of mystery was enough. 3 days, no rules, no ceiling. Each woman now carried both opportunity and exposure in her hands. Carter's eyes narrowed, unease gnawing at him. He knew the countdown had begun the moment the envelopes left Harlan's grip. He also knew none of them fully understood what they had just accepted. The game had started, and there was no reversing it. When the final envelope was placed in Nora Bennett's hands, her reaction broke the rhythm. She looked down at her name, brows furrowing, lips parting in confusion. For a moment she thought it was a notice of termination. Her voice cracked with suspicion. "Is this how you fire me?" She opened it slowly, almost reluctantly, and froze when the sleek card caught the light. A credit card. For me. Her eyes darted upward, wary. "Are you feeling unwell, sir?" Because yesterday's banana bread was burnt. Very burnt. Her humor carried no celebration, only doubt. Unlike Belle's vanity, Tessa's calculation, or Sloane's intrigue, Nora's grip tightened as though the card was a burden, not a prize. She stared at it as though it might bite. Joy never reached her face. Instead, her unease deepened her silence heavier than words. She didn't rush away with it. She didn't flaunt it. She held it with the hesitation of someone carrying responsibility she never asked for. And that hesitation left a question hanging in the air. What would Nora Bennett, the most ordinary of them all, do with limitless power? By the time the fourth card was claimed, the stage was set. Belle glowed with triumph, her mind already mapping out luxury stores. Tessa walked away with calm precision, her tablet waiting for the next list. Sloane slipped her card into her bag like a secret weapon, her smile hiding a storm. And Nora stood apart, card in hand, still uncertain, still troubled. From the shadows, Harlan watched every detail. Every smirk, every narrowed eye, every twitch of hesitation. He had given them the keys to reveal themselves, and now he could only wait. The clock ticked quietly in his head, 3 days. Beside him, Carter shifted uncomfortably. "You've lit the fuse," he muttered, "and you don't know what it will burn." His warning carried no weight. The fuse was already hissing. 4 women, 4 cards, 1 hidden observer. What had begun as an idea was now a living experiment. There would be no undoing it, no graceful retreat. Whatever truth emerged, Harlan had bound himself to it. The game had moved beyond theory, and in 3 days masks would fall. The first morning after receiving her black card, Belle Summers arrived with a handbag so expensive that even the receptionists whispered the brand under their breath. She walked through the office as if the polished floor was her catwalk, pausing just long enough for glances to follow. By noon, she had swiped the card for a designer gown, posted mirror selfies, and let comments flood in, unstoppable. Queen energy. Dinner was a performance. She booked the most exclusive table in the city, ordering champagne bottles she didn't bother to finish. Her phone streamed live as she lifted a glass, winking into the lens. "My boss knows I'm worth it. Finally proof." The comments rolled in praise, envy, and disbelief. Belle basked in it, glowing under attention that felt like oxygen. Coworkers watched her feeds, half in awe, half in resentment. For them, it was arrogance. For Belle, it was validation. The card was never about opportunity. It was a stage prop, one she wielded to prove superiority. Every purchase was a declaration that she was priceless. Every indulgence was aimed at an audience she demanded to impress. She wasn't hiding. She wanted the world to know. And the more she flaunted, the heavier the silence around her became. Belle had set the tone this experiment would not stay quiet. Tessa Monroe's approach was quieter, but no less dangerous. While Belle craved the spotlight, Tessa preferred precision. She sat with her tablet stylus in hand, plotting transactions like battle strategies. Each note, each chart, each highlighted cell gave the illusion of control. She wasn't shopping, she was investing. Or so she told herself, and anyone who asked. The card went first toward a high-priced executive leadership program advertised with glossy brochures promising global networks. Then came a business-class flight to an international summit complete with hotel suites that matched her aspirations. She organized her expenses in Excel, neatly labeled as professional development. To anyone else, it looked commendable money used for growth, but her eyes betrayed her. The gleam was not about knowledge or skill. It was satisfaction at climbing another rung in her private ladder. Each purchase whispered, "I am above them. I am next." Colleagues who saw her plans admired her discipline. Some even envied her foresight. Yet beneath the praise was discomfort. It wasn't growth they saw, it was self-promotion disguised as progress. Tessa had mastered the art of ambition wrapped in virtue. She didn't need to flaunt like Belle. She only needed to make greed look responsible. And that subtlety was far more dangerous. Sloane Vesper did not rush. She moved with the patience of someone who had already decided how the story would end. Her first call was to an event planner whose name alone commanded headlines. Within hours, contracts were signed, the city's grand convention center, reserved caterers and lighting crews engaged performers booked with staggering fees. When colleagues whispered about costs, Sloane silenced them with a smile. This will be the event of the year, she declared, her voice smooth as velvet. And when people speak of it, they will speak of me. Her vision was not about the purchases, it was about the spectacle. A gala that would drown the city in lights, music, and elegance. A gathering so loud it erased every rival's name. The black card was no gift to her, it was ammunition. As she signed contracts, she laughed softly as though already savoring her coronation. Belle had her gowns, Tessa had her charts, but Sloane had scale. She didn't want to outshine co-workers, she wanted to crown herself queen. Carter, watching from the corner, felt unease tighten in his chest. Sloane's plan was not spending it, was domination. And if she succeeded, the others would vanish under her shadow. The game was escalating. 3 women, 3 strategies, none of them clean. And Harlan, hidden behind his disguise, took it all in with a tightening jaw. Carter sat in front of the glowing screen, the ledger of transactions spread out in cold numbers. His voice was flat as he read, though each line carried a weight he couldn't disguise. Belle, luxury handbag designer dress, champagne dinners. He scrolled down. Tessa, executive seminar business class flights, hotel suites under the name of self-development. Another flick, another sigh. Sloane, event planner fees, convention center reservations, lighting rigs, and media coverage. Harlan leaned back, arms crossed, his face a stone mask. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "Exactly as I expected." His laugh was sharp, humorless, cutting the silence in two. Carter watched him carefully. There was no surprise in Harlan's eyes, only confirmation of what he had believed all along. When given freedom, people spent not to build, but to boast. Greed wasn't hidden. It was proudly displayed. Yet even as he finished his report, Carter felt the bitterness settle heavier. Belle's vanity, Tessa's calculation, Sloane's hunger for domination. Each choice exposed them, but also confirmed Harlan's cynicism. The first climax of frustration had arrived, 3 women, 3 masks stripped away, none offering hope. The experiment had revealed exactly what Harlan expected. But Carter, uneasy, wondered was that all there was to see. Carter scrolled further, eyes narrowing at the final line. He tapped the screen twice as if disbelief could change the numbers. "This can't be right." Harlan glanced over. "Read it. Paint, boxes of diapers, formula, second-hand toys." Carter paused, then added, "and 200 hot dogs." The words hung in the air. Harlan's brow arched, the corner of his mouth twitching. 200 hot dogs, he repeated, half incredulous, half amused. It wasn't extravagance, it wasn't luxury, it wasn't even logic. Carter shook his head, baffled. She's either mad, or she's the only one who knows what she's doing. For the first time since the cards were given out, curiosity replaced weariness in Harlan's face. The other women had followed the script of greed, but Nora Bennett had broken it. 3 days, and she had chosen supplies that spoke not of indulgence, but of something else entirely. Responsibility, charity. Or something stranger, Harlan's straightened eyes sharpened with interest. If this experiment was meant to unmask, Nora had just turned it on him. He had to see for himself. The city lights thinned as Harlan drove each mile, carrying him farther from the glass towers that had defined his life. The roads narrowed, lined with modest houses whose porches carried children's bicycles and sagging chairs. The air felt different here, quieter, stripped of the constant hum of ambition. He slowed as a weathered sign came into view, Riverside Haven, Children's Home. The letters were chipped, the paint fading, but the building still stood stubborn and steady. Parked outside was the van. Nora had rented its back doors, swung open cardboard boxes stacked inside. Harlan's grip tightened on the wheel. His heart, usually steady in negotiations worth millions, beat faster now. This was no boardroom. This was unknown ground, and he felt it in his chest. He pulled over, stepping out into a world he had almost forgotten existed. A world without polished glass, without cameras, without applause. The trail of 200 hot dogs had led him here, and whatever waited beyond that doorway, Harlan knew would not fit into the neat calculations he had carried his whole life. Harlan spotted her before she noticed him. Nora Bennett moved across the courtyard in old jeans, a faded t-shirt streaked with flower hair tied back loosely with strands falling out, sweat glistening on her forehead. She balanced a box against her hip filled with worn teddy bears and bright plastic toys, her laughter slipping into the air as if it belonged there. Each trip from the van she carried more bags of groceries, cartons of milk, stacks of diapers. And every time children clustered around her, tugging at her sleeves, squealing with joy. To them, she wasn't a cleaner from a corporation. She was a magician delivering treasures. Her energy was tireless. She bent, lifted, soothed, laughed, never pausing, never asking for thanks. There was no pretense, no stage, no carefully posed photographs. Just effort poured out freely as though the weight of the boxes lightened the weight of the world. Harlan watched in silence, struck by the contrast. Belle had draped herself in luxury Tessa in clever justification, Sloane in spectacle. Nora wore nothing but sweat and sincerity. The difference was undeniable. For the first time he wondered if his cynicism might not survive this experiment. By afternoon, the building had transformed. Balloons were tied to trees, their colors bright against the worn brick walls. A long table was covered in rolls of cheap but cheerful paper plates stacked high with food bought on that mysterious card. Laughter spilled across the yard, chasing away years of quiet neglect. Children darted between chairs, chasing each other, their voices unrestrained. And in the center of the chaos stood Nora, her hair tucked under a clown wig, her face painted with messy colors, shoes 2 sizes too big. She twisted balloons with clumsy hands, each attempt ending in shapes that barely resembled animals. When one burst with a loud snap, she laughed harder than the children, doubling over her joy, unpolished and raw. The courtyard was no gala hall, no designer runway. Yet here in a cracked yard with paper streamers and second-hand toys, life was louder, purer, more radiant than any chandelier could provide. Harlan felt his chest tighten. He had attended countless banquets that cost more than this entire home was worth. None had ever felt so alive. Harlan stayed at the edge, almost afraid to move closer as though the spell might break. His eyes followed Nora as she bent to comfort a little girl who had tripped on the uneven pavement. The child's knees were scraped, tears pooling in her eyes. Nora crouched low, pulling a bandage from her pocket, brightly colored, patterned with stars. "This one is magic," she whispered, pressing it gently over the wound. "But it only works if you jump 3 times after I put it on." The girl sniffled, then giggled, hopping awkwardly on one leg, her pain forgotten. Nora clapped the children around her, cheered, and the courtyard rang with laughter that healed more than a scrape. Harlan's throat tightened. His eyes blurred, stung by something unfamiliar, admiration, regret, maybe both. For years he had believed kindness was a performance, a mask for hidden motives. But here, in this cracked courtyard, a woman in flower-stained clothes had shown him sincerity that no wealth could counterfeit. For the first time, the armor around his heart began to bend. The courtyard was winding down, boxes, half-unpacked balloons bobbing gently in the late breeze. Nora straightened, brushing her palms against her jeans, and turned only to freeze. There he was, Harlan West, standing awkwardly at the edge, caught between leaving and explaining. Her brows lifted in surprise. "Boss, what are you doing here?" The word carried suspicion, but also the casual honesty she always showed him. Harlan faltered, caught off guard. I have a friend connected to this place," he offered, his lie thin. His eyes sliding away. Nora narrowed her gaze, studying him. For a moment, silence stretched heavy and uncomfortable. Then with a sigh, she let it go. "Fine. If you're here, make yourself useful. Grab those tongs. We've got hot dogs to cook." It wasn't accusation, it wasn't dismissal, it was invitation, unexpected, disarming. Instead of pressing, she pulled him in. Harlan blinked, still holding his cover, but the simplicity of her command left him with no choice. For the first time in years, someone wasn't trying to impress him. She was asking him to serve. The grill hissed with heat as Harlan awkwardly stepped behind it, tongs in hand. Within minutes, chaos followed. Sausages slipped through the grate buns, scorched black at the edges, ketchup smeared across his pressed shirt. Sweat beaded at his temple, not from the heat, but from the children's delighted laughter. They crowded around, pointing, giggling. "You dropped another one," one shouted. Another squealed, "He's the clumsiest cook ever." Soon the chant began. Clumsy Uncle. Clumsy Uncle Harlan tried to salvage his dignity, but the more he worked, the more ridiculous he became. He flipped one hot dog straight onto the ground, groaning as the children roared louder. Nora leaned against the table, shaking her head with a grin. "You ever thought about demolition work, because cooking is clearly not your gift?" Harlan chuckled, rubbing a stain with no success. Yet beneath the embarrassment was something startlingly foreign acceptance. For once, he wasn't feared, obeyed, or flattered. He was simply laughed at, and strangely it felt good. As the grill settled and the children munched happily, one boy tugged on Harlan's sleeve, staring up with wide, curious eyes. "Mister, are you rich?" Harlan hesitated, lips twisting before he admitted softly, "A little." The boy's next question came without pause. "Can you buy a dragon?" Harlan blinked, caught off guard, then smiled awkwardly. "Dragons don't exist." The child crossed his arms stubbornly. "Yes, they do. Nora said she's seen one." Around them, the other children nodded eagerly, their faith in Nora unshaken. To them, she wasn't just the woman who cleaned floors or brought gifts. She was the keeper of magic, the one who could transform scraped knees into laughter and cardboard boxes into treasure. Harlan looked toward her standing with the children and realized the truth. To these kids, wealth wasn't money or power. Wealth was Nora's presence, her laughter, her care, her endless giving. And in that moment, she seemed richer than he had ever been. The courtyard fell quiet as the sun dipped lower. Balloons hung limp, their colors dulled, and paper cups lay scattered across the tables. Children drifted away in twos and threes, laughter fading into the distance. Nora moved through the mess with steady hands stacking plates, gathering wrappers, her face still lit with the soft afterglow of the day. Harlan bent beside her, scooping paper into bags, folding chairs with clumsy resolve. He wasn't used to this kind of labor, but tonight it felt necessary. Watching her, he finally asked the question that had been gnawing at him. "Why do you do all this when none of it is for you?" Nora looked up briefly, strands of hair falling, loose eyes calm. "Because they deserve to be happy. That's all." The simplicity struck harder than any corporate lecture, sharper than any negotiation. Harlan swallowed the words, lodging deep. She lived in a way he had forgotten was possible, giving without calculating return. And for the first time he realized how empty his victories had been. A day later he surprised himself by asking, "Join me for coffee." Nora blinked, nearly laughing. What a midlife crisis. But she agreed, curiosity outweighing doubt. They sat in a small cafe, no velvet curtains, no reserved tables, just chipped mugs and the smell of roasted beans. Nora sipped slowly, smirking. Rich people coffee tastes exactly like the one on the corner. Harlan smiled faintly. That's the point. It's simple. Normal. For a moment the world shrank to the table between them. No boardrooms, no disguises, no power games, just two people finding a kind of ease in ordinary conversation. Nora teased, he listened. She laughed, he felt lighter. It wasn't attraction yet, not fully, but it was a bridge, and Harlan, who had spent years surrounded by pretense, realized he had just found something rare, honesty served in a chipped cup. Back in the office, reality struck like a cold draft. Belle was showing off her latest handbag, placing it on her desk like a trophy. Tessa presented a detailed slide deck framing her luxury retreats as strategic investments. Sloane unveiled glossy posters for her upcoming gala, her name printed larger than the company's. Their voices blended into a familiar hum of self-interest, each one louder than the last. Harlan sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, but his mind elsewhere. He heard only echoes of children's laughter, the sound of balloons popping Nora's quiet words. They deserve to be happy. For years he had measured worth in balance, sheets, influence, and control. But now those markers felt shallow, almost laughable. Surrounded by ambition dressed as loyalty, Harlan's certainty cracked. For the first time he wondered, was his empire truly built on strength or on emptiness masked by wealth? The hall blazed with chandeliers, their crystals scattering light across polished marble. Guests drifted in wearing tuxedos and gowns, laughter clinking like glasses of champagne. At the center, Sloane Vesper emerged in a dress shimmering with silver, every step deliberate, every smile calculated. When she raised her glass to speak, it was not as an employee, but as though she owned the room itself. Belle paraded through the crowd, brandishing her new handbag like a crown jewel, posing for photos she orchestrated. Tessa spoke eagerly of her international conference, slipping mentions of strategic alliances into every conversation. Applause followed, shallow but constant, a theater of ambition. From his corner, Harlan watched, expression cool eyes, heavy with disdain. He had predicted this spectacle money translated into vanity power, into pretense. Everything was brighter, louder, grander, but emptier than ever. The women basked in hollow triumphs. For them, this was the pinnacle. For Harlan, it was a mirror of everything he despised. And then, against the glitter and noise, Nora appeared. She wore a simple navy dress, hair swept into a loose bun. No spotlight followed her, no cameras turned, yet she carried a presence the gala couldn't dim. She didn't climb the stage or chase applause. Instead, she stood quietly with a small group of donors, showing them photos of children from Riverside Haven. Her words weren't polished, they were sincere. She didn't boast, didn't flatter. She simply described the laughter of children, the peeling paint of the walls, the need for brighter days. Her eyes shone not with calculation, but with conviction. In a hall designed to celebrate excess, her simplicity cut through like a blade. While others flaunted handbags and schedules, Nora spoke of futures. While Sloane commanded attention with grandeur, Nora earned it with truth. And Harlan, watching from the crowd, felt his gaze pulled to her alone. The moment shattered quickly. A figure brushed too close, deliberately tilting a glass of red wine over Nora's dress. The liquid bloomed against the fabric, staining it like a wound. Gasps rippled through the hall. Belle smirked from the corner, lips curled in satisfaction. Tessa pretended to study her phone, unwilling to intervene. Nora froze, cheeks burning, hands clenching against the ruined fabric. She stood small in the glare of so many eyes, the weight of ridicule pressing down. Whispers rose like smoke. She doesn't belong here. Before she could retreat, Harlan moved. He shrugged off his tailored jacket and draped it over her shoulders with deliberate care. His voice cut through the whispers, steady and firm. The most important person in this room isn't the one in the most expensive gown. It's the one here to make sure children have a future. Silence fell. Nora lifted her eyes to him, gratitude flickering through the humiliation. In that instant, Harlan's stance was no longer hidden. He had chosen his side, and it wasn't with the powerful. The room stilled as Harlan's voice cut through the murmur of whispers. The most important person here isn't the one draped in gowns or jewels. It's the one who came to fight for children's futures. His words rang against the crystal chandeliers, louder than the music, sharper than applause. Every head turned. Nora, clutching the edges of his jacket, lifted her gaze, her eyes shimmering with tears she refused to let fall. The crowd's judgment faltered under the weight of Harlan's stance. Belle's confident smile stiffened, frozen mid-performance. Tessa shifted uncomfortably, the pride in her eyes flickering into unease. Sloane, ever the tactician, slipped quietly toward the exit, her grandeur suddenly hollow under the spotlight she could no longer control. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. No one dared to challenge him, not tonight. Nora stood at the center, not as a servant or outsider, but as the one Harlan had publicly chosen to honor. The declaration shook the room, and in that instant the gala belonged not to Sloane, nor Belle, nor Tessa. It belonged to Nora Bennett. By morning, the victory soured. Headlines splashed across the city: "Janitor exploits company black card for personal gain." The photos were familiar. Nora swiping the card, Nora carrying boxes but twisted by captions that painted greed instead of generosity. News anchors repeated the story with gleeful precision. Online comments poured in, mocking, cynical, cruel. So much for the noble act. They're all the same. The narrative spread like wildfire. Inside, the company whispers sharpened into judgments. Some employees nodded knowingly. Of course she used him. Others expressed pity, but their silence stung just as much. Belle flaunted false shock. Tessa raised brows as if she had suspected it all along. Their smirks were quiet but unmistakable. Carter slid the newspaper across Harlan's desk. The headline screamed betrayal. For once, Harlan didn't lash out. He just sat there motionless, the doubt pressing against his chest like iron. The night before, he had stood before a crowd, defiant and proud. Now, alone in his office, his conviction wavered. By the second day, the scandal had become a storm. Major outlets ran the same story: housekeeper caught in charity scam. Every article recycled the doctored images, every broadcast repeated the lie until it echoed louder than truth. Social media turned vicious. Memes mocked Nora's plain dress comments, ridiculed her smile. To thousands of strangers, she was no longer a woman who had brought joy to children, she was a symbol of hypocrisy. At the company, conversations stopped when she passed. Colleagues whispered, "I knew she wasn't that innocent." The same people who had ignored her now feasted on her downfall. In a corner office, Belle and Tessa sat together, sharing knowing glances, lips curved in satisfaction. They didn't need to confess. They had engineered the narrative, weaving envy and malice into a web strong enough to strangle. Nora's name, once barely noticed, was now infamous, and for the first time she stood exposed not in silence but in ridicule. Harlan read the headlines again, the images burned into his mind. Logic told him it was fabricated, but doubt gnawed relentlessly. Could he truly trust what he had seen, or had he been blinded by her simplicity? The storm had begun, and it was merciless. Carter laid the folder on Harlan's desk without a word. Inside were clippings, screenshots, and statements from restless shareholders. The headline was bold: "If this is true, act now." Their message was clear. Distance himself, cut her loose, preserve the company's name. Harlan's fingers lingered on the papers. He saw the doctored images, Nora at a register, Nora swiping the card. His chest tightened as memories intruded: the receipts, milk diapers, paint, hot dogs. Ordinary things, selfless things. Yet the voices in his head twisted them. Or was it all an act, a performance to win his sympathy? The contradiction gnawed at him. He had seen her laugh with children, had watched her bring light to a cracked courtyard. But he had also seen ambition consume people before. Could Nora be different, or was he desperate to believe she was? He leaned back, silence, heavy eyes clouded with conflict. Trust battled suspicion, but suspicion whispered louder. For the first time, his certainty fractured. The kitchen smelled faintly of soap and bread when Harlan stepped inside. Nora stood at the counter, sleeves rolled, scrubbing a pan. She looked up, startled, as he asked the question he could barely voice. "Did you take the money?" The words landed like a blow. She froze, sponge in hand, her breath catching. Slowly, her eyes filled, shimmering but unbroken. "After everything you've seen, you still believe I could?" Her voice cracked not with anger, but with sorrow. The silence that followed was unbearable. Harlan had no answer, no defense, only doubt. She reached behind her neck, untied her apron, and laid it carefully on the counter. Her movements were deliberate, heavy with finality. She didn't argue, didn't plead. Disappointment was louder than any denial. Without another word, she turned and walked past him, leaving him rooted in place, crushed beneath the weight of his own mistrust. The next morning, the building felt colder. Nora walked slowly through the lobby, a small bag slung over her shoulder. Her steps echoed against the marble, each one heavier than the last. She didn't rush. She carried herself with quiet dignity, though her departure felt like loss carved into stone. Some employees looked on with sympathy, whispering softly. Others exchanged smirks, satisfied that the scandal had confirmed their suspicions. Neither voice reached her. She kept her gaze forward, expression calm, though her absence already left the air hollow. Carter watched from a distance, jaw tight, his disapproval directed not at her, but at the man upstairs. He shook his head, knowing Harlan had crossed a line no evidence could easily erase. In his office above, Harlan stood at the window staring down. But when she passed beneath, he turned away. He couldn't bear to watch the only honest light in his company slip out the door. And as the doors closed behind her, silence fell heavier than any scandal. Carter couldn't let the scandal rest. While the company whispered and the press screamed, he dug quietly through records others ignored. Late nights with spreadsheets, endless lines of emails, until finally he found it. A string of messages between Belle and Tessa, smug and careless, plotting the perfect smear. The images of Nora swiping the card, cropped and altered. The financial records showing misuse forged by selective edits, figures twisted to frame her. Belle had supplied the drama, Tessa the strategy. Together they had orchestrated the storm that destroyed Nora's reputation. Sloane's name surfaced too, but only as a shadow. She hadn't touched the plan directly. Her silence was her shield. She stood aside, letting others burn their hands while she observed from a safe distance. Carter leaned back, anger simmering. The truth was ugly, but it was clear. Nora had been sacrificed to vanity and ambition, and Harlan, blinded by doubt, had let it happen. The villains were no longer hidden. Their fingerprints stained every page. The boardroom was full, executives, shareholders, reporters, all restless with questions. Harlan stood at the head, his expression carved in steel. Without preamble, he slammed a folder onto the table. Enough rumors. This is the truth. He opened the file, page after page of damning evidence. Email threads, doctored images, falsified accounts, all traced back to Belle and Tessa. He read their words aloud, each line a nail in the coffin of their reputations. The room shifted, whispers swelling into outrage. Belle's painted confidence drained, leaving her pale and stiff. Tessa's tablet slipped from her grip, her precision shattered. Sloane rose, quietly slipping away before the flames could reach her, her silence her only defense. Harlan's voice cut through the storm. "You accused the wrong person. The woman you tried to destroy is the only one who showed integrity in this entire test." Justice was no longer whispered. It was shouted, and for the first time the balance tilted back toward truth. The meeting ended, but Harlan didn't stay to savor the victory. He drove straight to Riverside Haven, the steering wheel gripped tight in his hands. The moment he stepped out, children rushed him, tugging at his sleeves, laughing, pulling him toward games he didn't know how to play. Their joy stabbed deeper than applause ever had. Inside, the air was filled with the scratch of pencils and soft chatter. At a small table, Nora sat with a boy guiding his hand as he traced shaky letters across a page. She looked up when the room hushed. Their eyes met, and her expression hardened. "Why are you here?" Her voice was cool-edged with the memory of betrayal. Harlan's throat tightened. He stepped closer, words catching. "I was wrong. I didn't believe you when it mattered most." The room held its breath. Children watched quietly, sensing the weight in the air. For the first time, the powerful man who trusted no one stood exposed, asking forgiveness from the woman he had failed. Inside the modest hall, Nora sat surrounded by children, their laughter shielding her from him. She didn't look up when Harlan approached, documents in his hand. His voice was low, steady. "I don't just believe you. I want to stand with you." He placed the folder before her, emails, evidence, the truth finally unmasked. Nora's eyes lingered on the pages. Her hands trembled, tears slipping silently. She saw vindication, yet her heart held the memory of betrayal. She didn't rush toward him. She stayed still, distance intact, testing whether his remorse could endure. Months later, change was no longer theory, it was lived. The Riverside Foundation had risen, children filling Harlan's once sterile office with laughter and crayons. Nora worked beside him, guiding projects, her presence grounding what ambition never could. On weekends, the company's marble halls rang with games, balloons, and joy. Carter, leaning in a doorway, chuckled. "You finally made your best investment, not money, but trust." Harlan smiled, not the cold smirk of a CEO, but the quiet ease of a man transformed. He was no longer above his people. He was among them. A true leader is not measured by power, but by the kindness they choose to give. Wealth, status, and titles fade, but the lives touched by generosity remain. If you held a black card with no limits, would you spend it to elevate yourself or to bring joy to others who need it most? If this story reached your heart, leave a comment, share it with someone you care about, and help spread a reminder. The world easily forgets. Kindness is the greatest legacy.